I'd like to invite each of the participants to introduce themselves and their tradition. Please also tell them what geographic area of the world it originates from. And if you would provide a very short, emphasis on short blessing, because we have a lot to cover, but I think that there's something very authentic that comes forward when you share a blessing of a culture. So,
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tonatiuh. I come from Mexico City. Close by, there's a little town called Teotihuacan. My people is the one that created pyramids 2,000 years ago. They're still over there trying to preserve the tradition. That's the reason why I'm here today. We're creating a cultural center close by to preserve the dance ceremonies, to preserve the art, to preserve the philosophy, and especially to preserve our religion that is sharing. So that's why today I was glad to share with you a medicine stone that I would like you to take, if you don't mind, if you have the stone with you. Put it in your right hand, and with your right hand, put it on the top like this. And close your eyes. Please. Tlazocamati inguaytonachi, Intlazocama, inguayehecat, inguaytona, inguaytoshli, inguaycali. Inamokine quinquempanolo, inguaytlahuiscalpanteputli, inehecat, inoli intonatiuh, se, ome, ye, nawe. Put your hands together and ometel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Kalu Womo. I'm originally from eastern Nigeria. My family is from the Igbo ethnic group of Nigeria. And also we're from our own community group called Abreba, which is one of the oldest kingdoms in Nigeria. The Igbos are a civilization that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Our particular group can trace our history all the way back to 1400. One thing I do want to definitely talk about today is traditional processes, traditional governance, and I'll share some of our traditions of how we organize and how we communicate and sustain our culture. One thing we really do when we're in a meeting room or a meeting house is we have a call and response just to make sure everybody's present. So one thing we do is when I'm going to say a couple words and then you guys just say wa. Ibo Quen.
Wa.
Ahí Abreba.
Wa.
Ahí Igbo.
Wa.
My name is Aina Momo. My tradition comes from West Africa, Yoruba land. We share territory with my brother there. Also the diaspora, which during the slave trade, Yoruba traditions also were placed within Brazil, Trinidad and Tobago, Cuba, large portions of South America. Recently it's been revived in Argentina. And of course within the United States of America. We now estimate Yoruba-based religious traditions to be practiced by 100 million people around the globe. It has superseded its ethnic origins, which now we boast of priests from various traditions, European traditions, as well as Germanic traditions, also now practice Yoruba religious consciousness. So that's what I do. And I'm one of the elders in the diaspora.
Ahí Queen. Next now.
sorry, did you want to?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Okay.
Enter.
Everybody just touch your your head, please. And give thanks for the day in your own way. Ask that your head lead you to your highest destiny. Acknowledge your head as your seat of consciousness. And I'll just do something quick in your back. Ori mashemyo, ori mashemyo, ori bemi, ori sami, ori wa, ori wa, ori wa. Thank you.
Ahí Queen. Next now Javier. Let's see Wedge Push. Let's see Tecton. My name's Javier Kinney. I'm a member of the Yurok tribe of Northern California. We're the largest tribe in the state of California, have one of the largest land bases. I'm from the villages, as I just introduced, Pecton, Westwoods, Lur. It's actually one of the longest inhabited villages as well. But one of the things I wanted to just share with you in the opening, and share a song after our panel's concluding here as well. But we don't just say hello in our language. What we do is it's almost a feeling, and I just wanted to share that with you. It's pretty easy. It's ai kui. You can repeat after me. Ai kui.
Ai kui.
Kui. So what that's saying is, I'm lonesome to see you. Whenever you say, we don't say hello, we don't say goodbye, but basically when we see each other, whether it's a friend, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a person that we're meeting for the first time, and you can just carry that ai kui, and it's a feeling. And so what I wanted to share again with you as well is I'm honored to be here. Whenever we travel with guests to whatever traditional lands we're in, and so I'm honored again to have the panelists come into my life as well, the organizers of this event, and yourselves. But there were indigenous peoples from Manhattan, from this area here, the Lenape as well. And again, in 1977, a delegation of tribal leaders and indigenous leaders from the Six Nations went to Geneva for the first time to advocate at the international level. Our tribe has been involved in the advocacy and the fighting for the rights and the privileges of not only treaty-based tribes, but the border tribes. And respect, understanding, and renewal is what I'll be sharing with you as we get into that a little bit more deeply. So again, it's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here. I look forward to discussing more.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the things you've all probably noticed in listening to the blessings and invocations and just the readings is that when indigenous cultures, there's multiple meanings. Nothing is just hello, nothing is just goodbye, nothing is just how are you. There's a great deal of philosophy and depth that comes with each of those greetings. And what I witnessed in the work that the Memnosyne Institute, which I'm one of the co-founders and president of, and we worked with indigenous tribes all over the world. And just so that people are aware of it, I know that you're not sitting here, but there are indigenous people that are Caucasian, there are indigenous people that are Asian as well, and it's important that people are aware. Because some of the callous comments that sometimes you hear, and I'm going to say a few of them because you might hear them. I've heard people say, when I mentioned talking about Caucasian indigenous people, oh, I thought we were all civilized. These are the kind of unconscious comments and the kind of unconscious assumptions. And the reason why I wanted to quote that one is because what is civilized? What is a different kind of thinking? Civilized, means one type of culture. But when we start looking back, and all the people sitting here have endured a great deal of struggles, and they have a lot that is really held in a very deep way among themselves because they're very aware in ways I can't even begin to speak. That they're not just sitting here because they're representing their cultures, they're sitting here to try and reach out to all of you who are in very empowered positions or will be in very empowered positions in the near future. So that when you come across an investment or something that is actually going to be affecting the lives of indigenous people, that hopefully something that you receive here today will kind of stick in the back of your mind and more importantly in your heart, and you will recall this discussion. So I'm asking you all to not compartmentalize because, in indigenous thinking, there's not compartmentalization of this is work, this is play, this is spirituality, this is science. It's all combined. And for them, and this is what I think, I guess the Western and Eastern, more technologically oriented cultures are just now catching up with SRIs and environmentalism, is that everything is held in a balance and everything is interconnected. And they've been saying this for centuries. So I'd like to begin by asking each of you all to vocalize what is some of the, first of all, if you can share a story of when in a short way, when your culture first encountered people outside your culture, and how has it affected you? And how are you now beginning to adapt, and what would you like to see happen in the future?
Well, personally, I live in a place that is very visited by thousands of tourists every year. And I think it happened to my grandpa when we come from a clay pot people. My community, everybody does clay, and back in the 1940s, there used to be a train system going through the city. And that's the time when they start to uncover our temples. And when that happened, we had to, make a living, because they have to move our lands that we used to be planting, and that's where we have the temples. So that happened in that time when we had to start to sell our traditional pots that we use for living for the people that was coming to make a living, because we have no more land to plant the corn, because we were moved from that little place that we have in a valley. So that happened 60 years ago, and it turns into today what you call handcraft. People call it art. And when we see that, and especially myself, when I saw people getting surprised of the thing that we do with our hands, it's beautiful just to see how they get, not shocked, but impressed, of something that happened when you go to the land. My grandpa used to go and teach my father how to say thank you to the land, because we're going to take the part of the mud, and then we want to work with it, and then we're going to go with our mother, and we're going to ask her to, light a fire, because we cannot light the fire. The woman is the one that has to light the fire, because she's the one cooking. She's the one that can talk to the fire. So when she lights the fire, then we create something there with our hands, and then we give it to life in a ceramic pot. And then we go outside to the modern world and we share it. And every time you get one handcraft, imagine all the process that has to suffer, and all the blessing that has been receiving that piece of art to be in your hands. So I think that's one of the first things that we are now acknowledge, that every time you have something in your hands, maybe it has been a process that people call today manufacturing or factory. But in the traditional way we do, we say thank you to every single process, and we say thank you to every single element that is there.
One thing that came to mind when you said, Marianne was talking about our cultures being, coming into contact with outsiders, or there's a big misconception that our communities have been isolated in their villages for hundreds and thousands of years. One interesting fact about Igbos and about our particular culture, in particular our particular cultural group, is that we're traders, and we have trade routes that go all the way from the western coast of Africa to the Middle East. There's been documentation of treaties and pacts with Persian trade groups, East Indian trade groups. So I think because a lot of the tradition is passed down orally, there hasn't been documentation between 1400 and to present on how that process went about. So a lot of things are still hidden, and a lot of things I'm finding out more and more as I dig deeper. And I'm glad that we have this roundtable right now, because it's forcing me now to really go back and dig deeper into my culture and what those processes are, what the sciences are. So Aruba, we have a community group, a community union that was actually formed in 1444. I was sharing that with you the other day because we had dinner and we were talking about this panel, and it also forced me to just do some more research. So 1444, it hit me, and I was like, wow, they've been organizing for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in a very, very meticulous way. And that's one thing that hit me, and that's one thing that I want to share, and that's one thing I want people to kind of take away.
It's also one thing that helps us understand why you're so good at NEXUS. It's in your blood, organizing. Yes.
I want to talk about indigenous people as social capital because I think that's critical to bring to the table to discussion. Well, we're all very idealistic in the world we want to build, but there's some very harsh realities that come with investments into indigenous cultures. And I just want to bring that to the table for some discussion. Because sometimes investment destroys our culture. And it's very difficult for us to preserve and be a keeper beyond those helpful hands that come to help us. And so if we could just get investors to be more sympathetic or in harmony with the areas that they go into, and not try to assume leadership, but become helpers. The people know what they need, and your investments will last longer and be more protected by them if you're giving them what they want. Because that's a key piece. When you invest in building a building and all the workers go home at night, if the people don't like what you're doing, they will destroy it. There'll be high rates of theft, there'll be pillage. So it's in your best interest to get with the people in terms of what they want and help them to build the world that they want. And you will have long-term investment stability. Also to know that ultimately, whatever investments that you make, we are the people that are going to do the work. And so just mutual respect is very important. Getting to know who the leaders are in a given area, giving those elders in those groups time to talk to you, communication. This is real simple stuff, but it can make or break $1 million investments, just the way you go about doing what you're doing. As an African in the Americas, dispersal is something that I live with every day. We have lived with it for 500 years. And the fact that we are now global Africans and global indigenous people all over the world are together struggling to preserve our heritages, no matter whether they're Celtic, whether they're Yoruba, whether they're Akan, whether they're Zulu. People are now realizing that it is important to maintain their indigenous spirit, their culture. And if you help them, if you go in there and find out what they need, everyone will be more happy and humanity will elevate, as opposed to being contributors at the end of the road and funding museums so that we can look at what we used to be. Help us to keep who we are and to teach our children so that we are not wiped off the face of the earth. I was in an earlier workshop and they talked about faith and in how that impacts investments. It really does. It's very important because, for instance, in Haiti, no Christ, no rice. So is this the way we want to make the world better? Where we impose upon people, if you want this building or if you want infrastructure, you must adopt and take on my Christ to get the rights I have. So, I mean, just a sensitivity. So I just really didn't want to be kumbaya. I wanted to really talk about some of the day-to-day living hardships that are caused by very good ideas and good intentions. And if you would just take hold of the hands of the people you say you want to help and not try to impose upon them, but work together, we'll all achieve the ends that we want. Thank you.
Well, traditionally, the Yurok tribe is known for three things. And we're located, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the state of California, but we're off the grid. We're about a 5-hour drive north of San Francisco, along the Klamath River. My particular village is at the confluence of the Trinity and Klamath Rivers, which was again a specific area for trade, for ceremonial coming together of not only the Yurok people was organized in villages, but brought together the neighboring tribes as well. So if you just think about it, we spoke 5, 6 different languages, because none of the tribes in the area speak the same language for a specific reason. But in our ceremonial times, we all come together, set everything aside. So we're known for water, we're known for fish, and we're known for a world renewal ceremonies. We're a fix the world people. Every other year, we come together in prayer and song and dance, and not just for the Yurok people, for the entire world. And we're unique in that area that there's a specific place and that we're tied to that land and to that place, and we'll always be there since time immemorial, and we'll continue that. But we've also faced the attempts of genocide, the attempts of destabilization, the economic warfare, the intellectual, cultural destruction, but we got through that. And so if you want to get into that historical part, I can provide you some references. But today, speaking with Marianne, and through my experiences, I wanted to give you some actions that you can take with you. If you're working on the front lines, if you truly are, that's what we encourage. And I want to support you, because I've been there. And there's violence out there. Again, there's manipulation. But we're strong. And Marianne asked me, what would you tell them? And I said, build strength. So I'm the director of the Office of Self-Governance for the Yurok tribe. So prior to contact, and even today, we had traditional forms of governance, we had traditional legal systems, we had traditional cultural systems that are still in place today. And sometimes we had to go underground with those systems because it was illegal to be Yurok. It was illegal to speak our language. It was illegal to pray. So what's important for now, I want to take this and share it with you, is that those elders, how we're taught, is they prayed for us. And the way we live today is based on those prayers. So how are we praying for those to come as well? And so we have to really understand that traditional education. So I learned that a lot of times they were telling me things, who my family was. The people before there was non-Yuroks there. We know those families, we know those individuals. We know how to manage the land, our fisheries, when the seaweeds is ready to pick, when we pick the acorns, our songs. And it's that we have to do for ourselves. So we encourage, again, that support. But at the end of the day, when everybody leaves, we have to be able to do for ourselves as well, just as much as we can do for others. So I just wanted to share with that's the respect that I'm talking about. And I'll get to, again, the understanding that we know here later, but that's really what I wanted to share with you on there and really encourage you.
One of the things that I'm sure you have heard so far is an emphasis on structure. There's a big assumption among people that come in and want to work with indigenous cultures that, oh, they're just disorganized, oh, there's a chief and everybody just answers to him. It's a dictatorship. It doesn't work that way. Quite often, if you look at for lack of a better term, and I should emphasize the word chief is an English term, but we're going to use it for, since everybody knows what it's kind of referring to. But a lot of people will look at the chief figure and they'll assume it's a dictatorship coming down. It's more like an hourglass, and the chief is that little thin part in the middle. And you have all the elders and other relevant people who are telling him what's going to happen. And then his job, and I guess in the NGO world, is like an executive director. His job is he goes out and he does what he's told to do. So you may go and you might talk to a chief and you think, oh, it's a done deal. No, the chief has to go and talk to who knows how many elders and how many other people and get their permission to move forward with an action. So these are kind of, again, it's a different way of thinking. So, again, think of it like an hourglass, and that's, of course, structures vary, and there are other, who's giving him information and telling him what to do varies with different societies, but it's a pretty safe thing to go in. And if you are working with the community, to ask them, okay, I'm glad you received me, I'm glad we talked, but if we're going to move forward with something, may I have permission to have an audience with your elders? And there's a good chance they'll say no. There's a good chance that they might wait till the 5th time you come around, because many of these societies around the world are so used to someone coming in there and saying, I'm here to help. And as a friend of mine who was doing work in Guatemala, he said, they said, okay, sure, see you later. And the 2nd time, okay, nice to see you again. 3rd time, well, I'm glad you're coming around more. And it wasn't until about the 4th time that they really started talking in earnest. It wasn't until the 5th time that it was believed. And that's because there's centuries of pain. So, it's really a test in a way to see how genuine your intention is and how committed you are. Because if you don't pass that test, chances are you're not going to have the patience to work with all the different kinds of structures that exist within the indigenous group itself. One example, and then I'll ask the panel for some more questions, but just as an example for many of you that have NGOs, something that we have found that's worked. In working with the Maya and the Yucatan, we've had a lot of people that have come in and have said that they couldn't make anything work. We listened to them and learned what their structure was. And then we assigned basic NGO structure to what already existed. So we based the design on what they were doing. And that allowed it to be sustainable, because we didn't ask them to change their structure, which is what a lot of governments have tried, and it doesn't work. So, as you listen to these stories, please, really pay attention to the uniqueness of how there is organization and governance and spiritual structure and how entangled they are with each other. A question that I'd like to ask you all, and I guess I'll go this way so that they're not always going last. What I'd like to ask is, one of the things that we talked about the other day was how, in your traditions, there's an understanding of cycles. There's an understanding of interconnectedness with the earth, and you don't see things as separate entities. Can you expound on that, and how maybe you're looking at that, how your approach to the environmental and eco-awareness, it might feel like it's just now catching up, but what you'd like to advise people that are on that track, since in your traditions you've been aware of those cycles for centuries.
Right. Well, no. I think what's, when I listen very carefully to the various discussions and the themes throughout NEXUS, and you can hear indigenous principles and values in some of the presentations. So sustainability is not a new concept. The ability to only take enough to support yourself, support your family, to support your village, but to help somebody that doesn't have. That's a key principle and value that we have. So if you fish all your fish out, we have 2 runs. We have sturgeon, we have salmon, we have chinook, we have coho, we have steelhead, we have trout. We've been blessed in that way. So as I mentioned before, we're geographically isolated, but the Creator really blessed us with the resources. And our women-made baskets are known world-renowned basket makers. And we didn't have books back then. We didn't have somebody saying, prove this to be a valid way of weaving your baskets for our caps, for our ceremonial caps. Our ladies wear them on their heads. We have burden baskets that carry wood and various other things. But in managing those resources, what we're finding is that we've been encouraging, whether it's the state government, federal governments, international governments, this is the way we've managed the resources here. How can we share that, number one, with indigenous communities around the world, which is, again, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Those are the types of things that we're involved in and advocating for. But at the practical level, having our biologists, not just a biologist that we hire or a PhD, we're the UROC biologists, we're the UROC PhDs. And that's that balance that we bring, that fusion and that synergy that, okay, here's the cultural perspective of how we implement these scientific knowledges and our traditional knowledges. There may be some tension there, right? Especially when people want to publish or quantify or extract that intellectual knowledge to make them that much more. But we've been able to balance that with what works for us. So sustainability, we're not environmentalists all of a sudden. We have redwoods that we use, our redwood canoes, we transported up and down the river. Again, hitting eddy to eddy, not going straight up. But those are just the simple knowledges that, again, traditional and indigenous peoples have. And there's things that we share, which is okay. But you know, I really want to encourage you, there's things that we prefer to keep to ourselves as well. Just because of our experiences, just because of that understanding that we can pray, we can say what we need to do, our scientific sort of those traditional knowledge, but they have to be applied right there. If somebody else does it, it's a little bit different. If I was to come over to New York and do the same thing, it's not going to work. And so it's the same thing of species of animals, it's the same thing of natural resources and in that natural order. And so that's why there's been such an effort to try to disconnect indigenous peoples from their lands. But really the motivation that I came to NEXUS for is put indigenous peoples as decision makers up front. So they're at the table developing with you. And so, you know, once we start doing that with co-management, people get scared of that word co-management for some reason. Right? We want to be a co-manager with that decision making. So you're not making and imposing, again, these regulations on us. But learn from what we've been doing for generations. And things seem to work out okay. But people are just not getting that. And that's fine, but we're going to continue that work.
I want to backtrack just a little bit in terms of governing and how complex a group of people are in terms of how many steps you have to go through to get clearance. You have no idea. It's a difficult task, but we're taught, most of us who, we're also monarchists, so we have an ultimate someone or some group that it appears that they have to find a word. But even they don't have to find a word because there are councils and groups and societies that advise and have input and have the power to also remove our kings and queens and so forth. We are taught that we are a collective person, that speaking the third person, I am a we. And this helps us to think differently from Western society who looks at themselves as an individual. I think as a we. I refer to myself as a we because I'm a collective being at this point in my life. I just wanted to share that. So our governing bodies are very complex, and it's very important to be successful, as Marianne said, to approach and get the proper procedures and approval from the appropriate governing bodies so that then you can have a clear road and honest communication both ways. In terms of environment, we are very much see ourselves as part of Mother Earth. Our deities and goddesses and gods, if it's just for familiar terms, are the rivers, the oceans, the mountains. The very dirt itself is the ultimate mother, the ultimate womb that we feel that we come from, and we will all return to that womb when we leave here. So for us, environmentalism and conservation is critical because these are our deities. These are the ultimate divine consciousness of the planet. They are the governing gods, such as the ocean. For example, we understand that everything has limitations, even gods. And so when the ocean exceeds its boundaries, you have major problems, you have tsunami, you have tidal wave, you have major destruction. So we learn these basic understandings from the earth itself and how it functions. So we know we must have limitations because the ocean does, the river does. We know that the freshwater fish cannot live in the salt water. We learn many things that it seems to me the academia is just not catching up, but we just kind of always knew them. We know that the depths of the sea is all white down there. Science is just now revealing that, but we've known that for 1,000 years. I cannot tell you how.
It's all what down there?
It's all white. Everything's white. And so how did my ancestors, who were so-called primitive, know what it looked like down there in the very depths of the sea beyond 14 miles? I don't know. And so we have been very involved in the ecosystems. We honor the mountains, the rivers, the rainwater, the clouds. So they're very much a part of our spirituality, Mother Earth is. And she's the ultimate source. We know that we must depend on her for everything. In my personal view, it's almost as if humanity is a parasite on Mother Earth. We bring absolutely nothing to the table. We simply take and take and take. And we must change that parasitic mindset that Mother Earth just is here to serve our needs. We have to begin to live in harmony and a part of that system, as opposed to being a parasite on it, where we just extract, extract, extract. Greed is different than profit. Then they should not be the same thing. And so I think we need to be more conscious of Mother Earth, because what happens if she shuts down, or she erupts, or we have lava coming down in Hawaii that just destroys to regenerate itself, because she will regenerate. We have a proverb that says, we never hear of Mother Earth dying, only that she's getting old. And periodically through Mother Earth's lifespan, she has changed and recycled when she gets tired of being abused. So we've had different ages of Mother Earth's life. So do not take this time we are here for granted. When she's tired, if you don't respect it, she will change and have a whole new species of critters running around. But she's germinating right now. So just have respect for the earth and the relationships that indigenous people have with their earth, their trees, their bugs, their animals. You know, we live very closely, and the fact that we depended on them and they on us is very clear for us. It's not shrouded with a lot of false things, synthetic things. It's, you know, you gotta till that soil. You know, if it gets cold, you gotta go out there and cover up your things. It's not just something we see on TV. It's very much a part of our everyday life and an expression of our spiritualities.
I'm not the biggest expert in all of our spiritual teachings. There's actually a manual that some members of the community put together about a couple of years ago. If anybody's interested, you can write this down. It's the way we spell it is Abiriba. That's Abiriba, and you can look it up. Just Google it, and you can find this manual. It's about 20 pages long, but it goes all the way from the origins of the kingdom to the present, and it goes into all of our community groups, our spiritual groups, and the relevance of them. But just to back up, 1444 was actually when they formed their first union, which is called the Aboriginal Community Improvement Union, and it was actually formed as a traders union. So at the top level, so it's a monarch. At the top level, we have the Eze, or king, and then you have 13 families that are part of the kingdom, and that also play a part in the king making. The families are also, the heads of the families are also heads of merchant houses. So the heads of the merchant houses pretty much control all the trade and business that happens in the kingdom and then outside of the kingdom. Since 1444, since it was created, we have ACIU chapters in almost any major city, in any major country, not major country, but any country in the world. So from that system that was set up back then is still being practiced today. Speaking of cycles, we go back to Abiriba every 2 to 4 years, because we have what we call an age grade system. So from about 27, you're allowed to join an age grade. The community is split up into different age groups. Historically, it was for during wartime, for war purposes. You wouldn't send all of your sons or daughters out to fight on the front lines because they can all be killed. So they formed age grades. So one age grade would be on the front lines, another age grade would be doing intelligence, another age grade would be doing something else in the community. But in present day, the age grades now have different community service responsibilities. One age grade has to build a road, one age grade has to build a school, one age grade has to do something with the more fundraising bodies. So they do fundraisers, and then every 2 to 4 years, you're to go back during Christmas time or a solstice period, and you perform your rites. So every 2 to 4 years, you move up into a new age grade, you perform different rites, you move into a new age grade, you have a new role and responsibility in the community until retirement, which is around 61 or 63 years. So that's something I wanted to share. But you guys should go look this up if you're really interested, and download the manual. It goes really in depth, because offhand I can't go into every single detail of spirituality and science, but it's there.
Well, if you look into my tradition, there is a myth of the creation, and everybody I think knows about it. It's called the Aztec calendar. The Aztecs went to my people before they arrived to Mexico's central part. They took every single part of our tradition, and then they created part of them. So thanks to them, the calendar that is there says that we were punished 4 times before we have lived in this life, because the humanity has no aware of how many damage we have been doing. So they give us a last chance. That's what they say. And then they create us out of the corn, and they put the responsibility to my people to protect the corn and to understand the cycle of corn. And that's why they tell us to become the Toltecas. Tolteca means creators, architects, construction people. And the name of the tradition is Toltecacayo, those that create with the heart, those that create with love. And it took us 300 years to planify the city, to understand the cycles of the universe, to understand the way how the sun moves and how the moon creates movement around the world, and then create the process of the clouds and everything like that, and how they affect everything that goes around. Now you understand that? Now it's time for you to create your city around it. And that's why most of our indigenous temples are based on the astronomical movement. Not before that. Before we understood that, there was no temples. Now we put the temples there, and we have to teach the people how to use the temples. And if you understand why they are located over there, and you understand the process of protecting them, to teach the new generations how to understand the cycle of life, you will be able to preserve your corn. And we understood that the corn has a cycle of 260 days. And it's going to start March 21st, and it's going to be finished December 22nd. You call it today spring and winter. And when we understood that we come from corn, because each of you has stayed in your mother womb 260 days at least. And because of that, we have to give back to Earth the time to breathe from December to March. And if you go to my area, you will see from December to March, there is no corn on the fields. There is the sun over there resting, waiting to be planted on March. And after that, you have to leave all the grass grow and then grow down, because there will be coming grasshoppers that will, eat the grass. And then we can eat them, and then recycle. And this is what you call organic, right? So it took me 7 years to go to college and to learn your language, to be able to be here, and to tell you that this is the way how we do it. We can work together in a way when you respect the people in the society. Learn our ways first. Understand our beliefs. Don't change our beliefs. Because in our tradition, I look at my brother and I say, teach me your way. I teach you mine. And tomorrow we can participate in yours and you can participate in mine. I don't want to change it, because I cannot change my body. So in our tradition we say, there's a beautiful song that we pray when we are inside of the sweat lodge, the Temazcal. We say, my blood is the water, my earth is my body. My breath is the air, but my heart is the fire. So when you understand that, you can go on because you respect the four elements. And that's what I think most of the time I've been hearing here. Environmental protection is protect yourself.
One of the things I'd like to make sure that, if nothing else, is imparted to any of you today is the most important quality in working with any of the indigenous people is simply humility. Presume you know absolutely nothing. That's a safe place. If you don't know any, if there's nothing else, and you have a genuine heart and you're going in there with the humility, things will work out. You'll make some funny mistakes, but they'll be recognized as funny mistakes and not intentional negative actions. One of the things I'd like to get rid of, in terms of, my father used to have an expression, the word assume makes an ass out of you and me, and he was very right. When we assume, we end up putting our thoughts and what we expect to see so much onto another that no matter what they're doing, what they're saying, we see something else than what they are. And one of the biggest assumptions that people make in working with indigenous cultures, and I've heard a lot of it at this, unfortunately, at this gathering, NEXUS gathering, so I'd like to address it, which is we're going to come in with our technology and we have the answers and we're just going to throw it on them and we're going to end up enlightening them and give them the tools they need. When I was in Tanzania, I can tell you every single Maasai had a cell phone. Every single, I had one Maasai said cell phones were invented for Maasai because we used to go out and look at the stars, find the place, have to memorize where that is, go back to our tribe. Now we go out, we find the place, and we call them and say, come over this way. So, and I met many Maasai that had doctorates. The oral traditions demand that there's incredible ability to retain memory. The songs, the chants, incredible memories. Yes, they had doctorates and they went back to living traditionally. So, there's these assumptions people make are often inaccurate. And I wanted to address also one of the assumptions is a lack of technology. Every indigenous culture, and I've been blessed to meet, it's kind of weird when I think about it, I've been blessed to meet about 50 indigenous cultures so far. And I can say that every single one of them has incredible technology. When he's talking about his pyramids, right now if you go to the top of the Sun Pyramid and you look down, you can see the part that people have rebuilt, and it's all awkward. His ancestors have it perfectly. If you talk to a Yoruba person and you think that they're doing divination, there's intense, beautiful mathematics behind it. There's beautiful aspects in all these different traditions. So it's very important to respect this technology. And before we turn to piano, I'm going to give you an example of how dire it is to ignore the knowledge of the people in an area. If we respect the humility that people have been there for thousands of years, and some traditions they claim longer, then respect that they know what's in their backyard. There's a tribe called the Huma tribe that were off the coast of Louisiana. And for centuries, they had a tradition of measuring water. Well, they did it again and again. The kids are like, why am I doing this? Granddad tells me to measure. But they go in, they measure it, and one day, it looked weird. They did it again, it looked weird. They did it again, it looked weird. So they called up the EPA and said, we think you have a problem. There's going to be a huge flood. This is going to happen, it's going to hurt. And the EPA said, well, wait, what science are you basing this on? And they said, well, this is our centuries of measuring. We know what happened. They said, oh, that's not science. Well, Hurricane Katrina happened. The Huma got out of the way, and you've seen the results of all the people that weren't warned that probably would have liked to have heard from the people that have lived there hundreds of years. But the EPA decided to ignore it. So this is what I mean by traditional science and technology. There's beauty in it, there's spirituality in it, but there's real science. And so respect the cultures you engage in with a great deal of humility, because chances are they can teach you a lot, if not more, than what you might be bringing to them. So from that standpoint, what I'd also like to ask each of our participants, if you could share with people one thing, and this isn't nearing the end, but I want to make sure that everything that you all want to have addressed is addressed. So if there's one thing that you want to make sure people Language Day. What is that?
I think I mentioned it before, it's just that renewal. So I'm making no qualms right now that the Yurok people, the Yurok youth, are looking to change the consciousness of way people view and perceive Indigenous people. We are looking to change that in a positive way. That consciousness is respectful and has that understanding. That again, I want to share a story and how important food is, you know, and the way that food brings Indigenous communities together in a lot of ways. Everything revolves around that food security. So when the Yurok tribes hears about scientific experiments happening that will raise salmon without water, you're going to see why the Yuroks are concerned about that, right? How you can raise a salmon or farm fish, right? What we've had in our lives and culture revolves around that, right? Genetically modified seeds. A colleague of mine is from Coachella, New Mexico. They have 10, 20,000-year-old seeds for a specific reason. Their culture and their lives revolve around that. But the story I have for you is, again, and it goes to the assumptions, because as Indigenous peoples too, we help and we want to reach out, but even ourselves, you know, I work with Indigenous communities in Bolivia, and Colombia, and Venezuela. We were in the Imataca forest and we had some experience with mining companies 200 years ago. So we got the call, send down a delegation with some doctors, lawyers. Again, I've gone on and received my undergraduate, master's, and law degree. So we went down. So we're in the jungle. I had to fly to Caracas in and go into the jungle. And so we're sitting around eating, and from where we're from, when somebody serves you, you eat, or you have to pay, but we say pay. So that means either washing dishes, or you put $1 up just for any of the disrespect. So I'm sitting down, eating, and they keep bringing the food. It's soup, you know. I want to be respectful. You know, in our culture, we eat until they don't serve you anymore. The lady starts standing around, you can feel people watching you, right? And I'm like, man, I can't eat no more. I'm, you know, literally, that's it. And they're snickering, they're a little bit laughing, and they said, well, are you done? I'm like, yeah. And they said, well, you just ate all the women's dinner. Right? So there, the women don't get to eat until the men are done eating. And so they're all standing around, so I ate all their dinner. So, you know, everyone had a good laugh at that. So I'm just bringing that out to you. So, you know, it's love what you do. Love what you do. You know, we're in a movement here that's positive, it's exciting. And so when you work with Indigenous communities, you know, I have a 10-year-old daughter, Jasmine, and a 12-year-old son, Coconut. You know, you're all invited. I'm telling you now, I've got the panelists as well, but if you ever find yourself in Northern California, but that's the investment as Indigenous peoples we put into other people. I went and received the education and came back. Because that's the commitment that we have. That's required, the technology. We've always had to do that. We've had technology. But we have to adjust that. Not meaning we have to give up who we are, but we have to adjust and work again with partners, with collaborations, with other individuals that support us in alliances. So that's why we go to Bolivia. That's why we go to Colombia, Venezuela. You know, that's why we do what we do. So I think if I have anything that change that consciousness, because you're going to be in rooms that a Yurok, that the panelists are not going to get into. You may be a decision maker to say, you know what, let's consider Indigenous peoples. Who's being affected by this development? Or how can we give and help them? Or have we even asked? Bring them to the table. Because it's not going to cost me that much more. It's actually going to save me money at the end of the day. So.
The most important thing I'd like to communicate is that for everyone to remember their own ancestors and know that you come from a long line of people and whose work empowered you to be here today. I And when you acknowledge the fact that you are a link in a very long chain of humanity, you will be at one with most indigenous people. And we cannot forget what your ancestor did that empowered you to be who you are. And I won't forget what my ancestors did to empower me to be me. And if we just remember that we are all humans, and that if we work together, what a wonderful world it will be. And how pretty is a garden with all kinds of flowers, wild flowers. And if we all just had only tulips, how boring would that be? So just know that we're in a garden of wildflowers and we are its beauty. And the creator, creatrix, is a god and goddess of diversity. Otherwise, we would all look the same. We would only have one type of tree or one flower. And so if we just get in harmony with that as human beings, remember your ancestors. That's the one thing I would say.
I want to just say, I think everybody, I'd encourage everybody to think of tradition as sustainability. A lot of people think of tradition or being traditional as anti-evolution or anti-modern. It's not that. Like I said, we've been practicing the same process of organization for the last, recorded for the last 600 years. And members of my community are doctors, lawyers, scientists, and they're spread out all over the world. So think of tradition as sustainability.
Well, there's two things I would like to share with you, and this is something that you have to keep in mind, especially with indigenous people like us. We are people that use the oral tradition always. So if we say we're going to do it, trust in the world, because we are people of word. We didn't have something to sign, because every time you look at each other face to face, is when you're talking heart to heart and you directly see some people with the eyes. You know, we always are eye contact people. So assuming to ask people to sign a paper in our culture sometimes is like, you don't trust me? You are not seated here in my house, you know? You are here in my life and I'm helping you. So, and it's an exercise also I would like to share with you. Look to your fellow, your right or your left, just one person, okay? And put your hands like this, fingers to fingers, right? Now, do like this, and close your hand, like this. There's a spiral, right? That's how you have to work, to make the movement happen. But remember, we can work together, but he is him, and I am me. I'll make that.
Okay, and I'd like to open up to questions. Yes.
I just want to add some points that it was an experience. When I was living in Houston, then I came back to Angola with a multinational company. And the first thing I learned by working closely with the people from different countries, like in oil and gas industry, was that an assumption. It's why I like when Mary was talking about assumption of something. Was an assumption that I'm dealing, for instance, I'm talking about African, I'm dealing with an African is corrupt person. So an assumption of corruption was something that really put my head out of control sometimes, and more emotional, because I grew up in a family with very ethical and values principles. And I was explaining to my colleagues, mainly I'm a lawyer, and we deal a lot with FCPA. I don't know if someone will know what Foreign Corruption Tax Act is. So most of the American companies have to comply with this law, and they train me here in DC what the FCPA is and so on. And they asked me, Lourdes, please go train your Angolan companies what the FCPA and so on. And that was an experience I have to share with you. And when I started giving a training to my Angolans, were my compatriots, they were saying, Lourdes, what you're talking about? This is a law that doesn't have anything to do with our culture. How can you an Angolan and you come here and explaining us that we can't receive presents in Christmas? And you know that Christmas can't. American companies, they can't give you only $10. If they give me $10 Christmas present, they're offending me. We work during all year and then they come with a $10 present. So it's very offensive, and that was a challenge for me to explain the American side and the Angolan side, how working together as just was explaining very well at once. The point was, and I couldn't make it, I could explain them that, okay, let's find a common ground here that we can work together. Because first of all, all African or different culture is corrupt. So we have a mind of ethics. Actually, we do things unethical because we value family's principles. And the family's principles are based on ethics, respecting adults, respecting the other people that teach you everything. So it's why when I'm speaking about corruption around the world, I said corrupt is from somewhere, not from Africa. Someone brought it in there because it's not culture thing that it's for Africans. Because if you talk, but now is an issue that we have to resolve. But the big happiness I have in my life is that I put Angolan people understand what the view of, for instance, American companies, and American companies understand the culture of the Christmas, for instance, present at the end of the year. So, and the assumption was something that I focused when I was talking with my colleagues, Americans. Guys, don't come with the brainwashed. Don't look to everyone saying like he's a corrupt and he's a stupid, he don't think. No, African actually sometimes they think more than everyone else because they go by signals, they work by eyes, it's why I really appreciate your shares. We are very, very similar with the way that we work there. And I just want to understand and pass a final message to you. Being in Africa is living in Africa.
Lydia, yes.
So I want to say thank you so much. I'm sorry that I came in late, but I spent my childhood living with indigenous cultures and the tribes in Arizona, and I spent my adult life seeking out to study and learn and then help preserve healing techniques of indigenous cultures, specifically within South Asia. I'm coordinating NEXUS India, and the question that I pose to you is that oftentimes we pose this concept of the West or the other coming in and holding down or degrading the indigenous cultures. But I'm coming from an arena here where it's Indians, modern Indians, who are in the cities, who are oppressing and degrading and disrespecting the many tribal religions of their own people. So I was wondering if you guys could give any kind of advice or guidance as to, since I'm convening and curating this, what I can do to help impart a sense of honor and the true place that these tribal cultures deserve, because we all came from them. And I think that specifically when it comes to India, we're such a rapidly modernizing society that there's this selective memory that they're trying to dissociate themselves so far from their roots so quickly. And I was hoping that maybe you could share any of your wisdom.
I would definitely suggest Tony.
It's a funny because we also have the same in Teotihuacan. Every time we try to go and make a ceremony in our temples, they charge us $5 to go into the temple. They don't let us do anything inside unless we want drum, And there are some other assumptions that people is doing there, and it's funny, right? It's funny because it's our temples, it's our place, and we have to pay for doing that. The thing that I wanted to share with you, and it has to be with two things. First, don't forget your elders, right? Second, don't forget your children. Put them together. That's how we do. If you have some knowledge here, And through the oral tradition, you have the youth here, especially the children, the young ones, the very young ones. They will share the tradition stories. Remember that most of us will learn from tell stories. All of you remember you tell stories from the bed, right? So if you go like that, you'll be able to approach your stories of your people to the kids. Because I'm sure, like I did, I remember the stories that my grandpa told me, and that's why I'm here. And tomorrow I'm gonna be a grandfather. And I wanna tell that story to them. You know, that's the only thing you can fight. You cannot fight, and I would say unfortunately, with legal issues. You cannot fight, you know, making a war because they don't let you in. You're not gonna fight physically. The strongest fight you're gonna do is when you do your culture alive by oral tradition. So keep it alive, like that.
I'd also suggest humor. You know, since we've been here, I won't say who, someone said to Tona, "You don't look like an Indian, you're in a suit." And
Oh my God.
and yeah, and this person was also from Mexico, and I told them, I said, next time someone says that to you, say, well, you're not wearing a flamenco dress. So you know, people make a lot of funny assumptions. I think we have time for 2 more questions, and then these people need to go. Yes.
I want to say thank you. This is so wonderful, and I learned a lot, and so many powerful stories. And I guess it's kind of a comment and a question, which is that it really struck me, and I have a lot of problems with the word help, because anytime we say that we're going to help somebody else, we're putting ourselves kind of above and then below, and that's so much of the challenge that we're talking about and that you were giving really great advice on, and also, frankly, the much larger problem for many times is this hierarchy. And so I'm curious for all of you, maybe what is a better way to phrase the kind of engagement? Because it really, what I really believe is that it's not just about giving or helping, but actually it's so clear, it's so obvious that people have so much to learn from your different traditions and your cultures and your communities. And anybody who might be coming to help is clearly going to learn just as much, if not more, than what they could possibly give. So I'm curious if maybe you have a way that you might phrase that, that we could take with us as we try to disseminate the messages from this room and to other places.
Bobby?
Well, I think just I mentioned before, building strength. Building strength. And it's not just one action, it's multifaceted, it's multi-tiered. To be able to say, okay, here's how we can build together. When we build something together, again, that foundation, that continues that building.
I think collaboration, and that would be very clear at the onset as to what the investors expecting to receive and what the people you're helping is going to receive. So that those things are very clear initially, and you have a better chance at success if you collaborate.
I know there are many other questions. We'll be in the hallway. You guys can ask questions out there. However, before we go and do respect to our elder, I'd like for you to close this beautiful service.
Oh, Dumare, Allah Dumare, oh, Dumare, Mo Dupwe Ojo, Mo Dupwe Ibashe Mabuliso Ibashe Yami la na 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 Ibashe le dami ati orimi Mo Dupwe Romo. We give thanks for all that is seen and unseen that we have shared together. We ask that our consciousness lead us all to our highest destiny to help humanity with the very best of intentions, and that you receive all the help you need as you endeavor to achieve those destinies.